It's been said before, and I'll say it again. Nobody circles the wagons like the Buffalo Bills. So where would you rather be than right here and right now on the Ralph Rant? Let's go.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant, your source for hard-hitting Buffalo Bills takes. Now, here's your host of the Ralph Rant, that veteran watcher of generations of Bills teams, the prophet who predicted Josh Allen's greatness, that opinionated so-and-so you've walked out on parties because of, the Ralph.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant. I am your host, the Ralph. Thank you ever so much for being here today. Got the intro music started a little bit late here, but that's all right. We'll let it fade out, just like we watched the Saints fade out today. And boy, I've got some things to say about this game, and they are very overriding. Let me go ahead and get your comments up on top here to go. All right, we've got Fume Drummer in the house already, and yeah, you can run on the Bills again. Yeah, we'll get to that as we get into it. The Buffalo Bills defeated the New Orleans Saints 31-19 in a game that really eerily resembled, in many ways, the Bills' defeat of the Dolphins on Thursday night a week ago when they beat the Bills. The Bills almost beat themselves when the Bills beat the Dolphins 31-21. Oddly, a 2-point difference in the opponent's score. And also very oddly, yet another roughing the kicker penalty, in this case versus the Saints, which gives Buffalo the ball back late. And again, you can conjure, in this case, just like you would have the week before, had that penalty not occurred, well, certainly the Saints get the ball, and if they score, perhaps, but the fact is that Buffalo probably would have been able to come back in the game. Anyway, I've got my notes here someplace. I did them on the iPad today using ChatGPT as a source to go ahead and do live dictation in here. And we can go through the game very, very quickly. And one thing I was happy to see, my very first note here, again, is I welcome you to the Ralph Rant. And, of course, if you're not subscribed to the channel, do so, because if you are, you'll be on hand when Mr. Arthur Moats, former Buffalo Bills and Pittsburgh Steelers linebacker, makes an appearance on the show, because my first note is notably one of my favorites. Jordan Phillips is out on the field with the Bills, and, of course, he's wearing Arthur Moats' old number 52. We saw him a little bit on the field, but mostly what we saw on the field was what, again, it's Bills, of course, giving up some things on defense, not looking solid in the run game, some missed tackles and so forth, some receivers running open. I do have an overriding. Let me get rid of this thing. I didn't even help me because I was supposed to turn on the music earlier. I don't know why I bother with the earpiece. But the Bills, as we know, in the McDermott era, have been perfect coming off the bye. Now, we're talking about the full week-long bye, which happens once per season, of course. So the Bills are perfect coming off the bye. This, of course, was a mini bye. So the Bills, you could call that a bye because it's kind of the same thing. The Bills have a little bit more time off. And while what I just said is true about the Bills being winners coming out of the bye very consistently in the McDermott era, the other thing that has been consistent is the Bills come out of the bye sluggish. Sluggish. We have seen it happen time and time again. And, of course, they always seem to recover. You could tell from the quick going into halftime interview that was done with Sean McDermott that McDermott clearly stated, well, they're outplaying us, and we're not playing good situational football. And I'm sure he had many other things to say. The other thing I'm sure of is he went into that locker room, and they may have broken into their groups or whatever, but for a short bit, I imagine Sean McDermott gave that team unshirted hell, because you could see it in the second half and see them kind of come alive and so forth. I think the other thing to mention, too, is the Buffalo Bills being perennial winners here, and this on a day, quite frankly, when the undefeated Chargers go into the totally defeated Giants and lose. And Jackson Dart was the reason, largely, for the Giants. And had the Giants played Jackson Dart last week when they entertained our favorite Kansas City Chiefs, they'd probably have won that game also, because that's just how bad Russell Wilson was, which I think is a statement more on the Chiefs even than the Giants, because the Giants were victorious today. But that's good to see, because we want any of the AFC contenders, especially when they're playing an NFC team, to win. Now, of course, the only exception to that is when I have Arthur Moats come on Wednesday night. He'll be pleased that the Steelers, whom he loves, and of course he had his great years there, the Steelers loved him, and he'll be happy that they beat the fairly hapless Minnesota Vikings earlier today in Dublin, Ireland. And that might be a bit surprising, of course, because, again, the Minnesota Vikings ended up whomping. I mean, they opened a can of whoop-ass on the Cincinnati Bengals. I believe it was 48-19, if I'm not mistaken, from last week, which I think says an awful lot about the Cincinnati Bengals. But if you look at the AFC overall now, before I get more deeply into this game, one of the comments that you have to consider is the fact that the Bills are appearing to be perhaps the best team in the AFC. I don't think there's any question of it on my part, and I think there's fewer questions now on the parts of others. You probably saw the graphic during the Bills game where, of course, Charles Davis, that's not a bad announcing crew, but Charles Davis just reminds me of Madden, and I get tired of his cliches. So sometimes I try to do without the announcers. Wasn't able to today. Somebody else was watching along with me. But they came up and made the statement that it hasn't been since 1975 that an 0-3 team has beaten a 3-0 team. Now, I don't know if they brought up that statistical nugget during the Giants-Chargers game. I've not had a chance to watch it. I will. I saw some of the highlights. But the fact, it didn't happen to the Bills, and it did happen to the Chargers, which is a very good thing, because that was huge in the Bills' quest for the number one seed and home field advantage. Just like Pittsburgh winning wasn't good for that. Now, Pittsburgh, of course, is 3-1, and they've got to be considered a contender. And whenever Pittsburgh plays the Ravens, that will be interesting. But that will be another week. And, of course, we're not going to keep this one too long, because I'm sure every one of you are quite interested in seeing what happens between the Ravens and the Chiefs today. We can hope and pray for a scoreless tie, or perhaps a Ravens win, which I think would be more advantageous for the Bills, because the Bills have a tiebreaker already over the Ravens, and the Bills seem to have the Ravens' number in the playoffs, where they do not the Chiefs. And, of course, it would be better to see the Chiefs get another loss. But getting into this game, and the point I was about to make before I got sidetracked by myself a moment ago, is the fact that the Bills do have something of a target on them. And any team coming in is going to try to give their very best effort. And frankly, the Saints were more competitive in their last two games. I did watch their game versus Seattle last week, and that game got away from them a little bit quickly. But in this game, Buffalo just seems like, and I think maybe I'm rationalizing this for part of a good reason, but the Bills seem like they kind of just are doing what they need to do to win these games rather than crushing an opponent. We have not really seen them crush anyone except for the Jets, but that was a circumstance where the Jets just were so poor that day. But I think the Bills probably want to get out of the habit. Of course, you'd like them to win every game by 40, but that's not possible. And it's better to see them at least seeing competition and having to work on winning these games early, rather than sitting Josh Allen throughout the entire fourth quarter and having a situation where you've won, great, you've got the dub, great, but you're not being challenged. They were certainly challenged today. And, of course, we saw, like Fume Drummer states, with the running, and again, I'm seeing the missed tackles, but, of going back here on some of my notes here, and I'm not going to read them verbatim, obviously. Boy, I did talk a lot, didn't I? Bills punted from deep after the missed defensive holding call by Lan Clark and his, I won't use that word, crew. Terrell Bernard got dinged there. He was back. Deion Walker actually looked good in this game. Again, with a couple of run stops. We're going to have to see the film, excuse me, to get an idea of where the Bills really are on the run stopping. And again, this was versus an offensive line, just like we talked about last week, where the offensive line is not great that the Bills are facing, and yet they do seem to get their yards running. But then Cole Bishop with his, down the list here a little bit, Cole Bishop gets the interception, the one-hander. We've got to like seeing that. And we go forward here. Saints make the 53-yard field goal, 14-10. TJ Sanders misses a tackle inside. Yeah, I've got a note here where it kind of looks to me like the Buffalo Bills paid too much attention to the betting line, which had the Bills favored by something like 15 points, and they only did 12. I imagine there were a lot of bettors that were upset that the Bills did not go down and get a clinching touchdown at the end, and rather ended up kneeling it out with the 12 points. So if you took New Orleans Saints and the points, at least you made some money. But overall, I think back to this point about the Bills coming out sluggish and then Sean McDermott giving them unshirted hell, as I stated earlier, at halftime, they did come out with a little bit more fire. I just believe that there is an overriding sense with the Bills that you have to do what you have to do to win football games. And even if it's kind of ugly, and if we could certainly say that a 10-point and a 12-point win, these last two games are ugly. But again, as I said the last time, when they beat the Dolphins on the Thursday night and they won today, these wins look very Patriot-esque from the Brady and Tom. I know we don't like to use that name. Our new Brady is Joe. But from the Tom Brady Patriots era, where the Patriots did not blow out a lot of teams. They were just able to measure the opponent and come back and, well, not come back, but just play to the level needed to go ahead and get the win. But I'm going to jump into your comments here. We all saw the game, and certainly the offense looked good early on. James Cook, again, scoring another touchdown. That set another record for, at least it was the franchise for touchdowns scored by a running back, I believe, in consecutive games. Josh Allen put on the cape a couple of times with dashes with the football in his hand, especially that last one in the fourth quarter where I don't know what play was called, but whatever was called to make the Saints think they might know what's coming, it was always going to be Josh rolling out to the left and going downfield and getting the first down. So the Bills now 4-0. In terms of injury, I think the only serious thing we saw was with Cameron Johnston. Again, not Johnson, as some of my other podcasters insist on continuing to call him. It's Johnston. And it looked like he hurt his knee. But once again, as I've told you in other podcasts, when a player is injured and looks to be in immediate writhing pain, it is often the case that it's not that serious of an injury. And of course, we saw him have the brace on, and he was good enough to go out and hold again. He did not have to punt again, obviously. But that's what we're talking about, a 4-0 Bills that is sluggish coming out of the bye, mini-bye in this case, that ends up winning the football game like they usually do, coming out of a mini-bye or a bye, and handling, in the end, a team that seemingly you think you're going to, well, fans think they'll be able to crush. These guys are all paid in the NFL. They're all good. They're all talented. the Bills did overcome them, and it was without really heroics. The Bills were just able to do what was necessary to get to 4-0 and do their weekly season of 1-0. So now the Bills will face next week, Sunday night, the Patriots at home in their rivalry uniforms. And speaking of rivalry uniforms, I have to just add this. I was watching, I believe, Thursday night when the Cardinals were playing, and they were at Seattle. I thought they were at Seattle, and why did I think that? Because I saw all the spots on their uniforms and thought, it must be raining. And of course, if it's raining, they're in Seattle. No, those are really, really bad rivalry uniforms. I don't know what the idea was there. I was certain for a while it was raining, and I'm looking to see glistening drops on helmets, which I didn't see. That's on me. It was at Arizona. But anyway, back to the situation with the Bills. Yes, they will be in their rivalry uniforms next Sunday night, and they won't look like rain because it's ice. Anyway, let's see who's in the house here. We've got Fume Drummer, 4 games in a row against winless opponents. An interesting stat for sure. And I'm going to get you on the screen with that one. And that's an interesting point because the winless opponents obviously have that much more of a desire. There's more angst. There's more energy in trying to pull off a win. So that's an interesting stat, and I don't know how that will be. And again, Fabrizio's in here in the house now. It's good to see you. I got to get this in. Hey, yeah. All right. But Fabrizio's saying week 7 will look different. And by week 7, I think you mean the Bills game number 7 after the bye, which will be actually week 8 of the season. And they will be at the Panthers for that game. And I've stated since the preseason that, again, with this notion of the Bills coming out of the bye sluggish, it is nice to see that they will have, I don't want to call it a warm-up game any more than I want to call today's an obviously winnable game, but it's better to see that than them going to see more of a contender. And, of course, after that so-called warm-up game against the Panthers after the bye, they will be at home versus the Kansas City Chiefs. 4:25 kick. Betting on football is a loser's deal. I'm not saying it's rigged, but it's not rigged. Again, you've got to go back to what I've always said, Fume Drummer. Never attribute to treachery that which can be explained by incompetence. And it's just not a conspiracy you could pull off. And in terms of it being scripted, no, you can't script this. This is the best reality TV on the planet, as we all know. Okay, that is all asterisks. Oh, no, it's all carrots. So I don't know where you're going with that, Fabrizio, but Fume Drummer, too many penalties by the Bills? Certainly. That's that early sloppiness that we're seeing from the Bills coming, especially this first half sloppiness coming out of the bye situation or a mini bye like this. And then, of course, the Bills had that ugly 13 offensive plays in a row plus penalties, which they had, I think it was 14 plays and 13 yards. They were averaging less than a yard per play. And again, some of that is based on trying to run. And then Josh Allen himself, seemingly a little bit sloppy. The one interception throwing into coverage down there, that was unlike him. And then on the other near interception over the middle, we did see in the replay that he was hit a little bit on his follow-through. That ball ducked a little bit. I don't mean ducked, but flew like a duck and was intercepted there. Again, I look at these things. I'm not looking for the Bills to be perfect on every play. Would we like that? Absolutely, we would like that. Would we like them to win 40-0 every single game? Sure. Tell you what, guys, about week 10, that would start to get a little bit boring. The whole idea of this is competition. And the Bills, sometimes it seems to me that the Bills this season resemble Secretariat in a way. And if you recall Secretariat, perhaps the greatest athlete ever, human or animal, was constantly in races up until the big one at Belmont, where he let the competition get ahead of him. He needed to feel that need to beat someone. And I think this is a situation with the Bills. Now, certainly you'd like to see better run stops. You'd like to see better tackling. I mean, how many times did we see the Saints running backs, Alvin Kamara or whom else, seem to be stopped at or near the line of scrimmage, maybe a yard ahead, and then end up squirting through for 4 or 5 yards? So, again, I'm just glad if they are learning, and again, this is being done the last few games without Ed Oliver and without Matt Milano, and that's a thing for Buffalo. But they will get them back, and I think they wanted to rest them again today, and certainly even Spencer Brown, who, if this was a playoff game today, you'd have seen Spencer Brown out there. But Ryan Vandermark was out there, and Vandermark is a nasty prick. So it's good to see him out there. And in fact, on the 1-4 down where Buffalo gave it up, on the inside give to Khalil Shakir, which I questioned that play. But Vandy, if he hadn't tripped over, I think it might have been David Edwards on the way to try to get that block on the edge, Shakir probably gets through for that. But Vandermark is a fine replacement, and this Bills offensive line, again, demonstrates itself. Let's keep on going into your comments here. And we got a bunch in the house right now, a couple dozen of you. Thanks so much. Let me know where you're coming in from. Let me see your comments. I want to hear from you. And again, if you're not subscribed to the channel, do so. Again, we've got Arthur Moats coming up right here Wednesday night. And we're going to ask him an awful lot about the Bills from a player's perspective. But let's keep on going here. Fume Drummer says Saints quarterback Rattler is 0-11 in games he has started. They're getting back to the days when they're instant W's on opponent schedules. And that's for certain. And today, in fact, was Rattler's 25th birthday. That didn't help him much. The Bills did not want to give him too many presents. They gave him a few. But again, the Saints are developing, but they were game today. And if a Saints fan is going to take anything from this, perhaps you can take that. And again, of course, 30 points in every game so far, for sure. I like the Bills' game plan at first, stretch the field a little and keep Cook simmering. The balance was good. And I think they wanted to actually keep Cook going. And I think the Bills would like to win games like that. I think in the running game allows a team to play more calmly. You're eating more clock. It's the ability to get through and win games without having to put so much into it. But what are you going to do? At any rate, I like the fact that the Bills get challenged and they're able to come back, or not so much come back. I think anymore we talk about the fact that when a team gets within 3 or 4 of the Bills, like today, that it almost feels like the Bills are losing and they have to come back from that. But again, these wins, and I'll keep on saying it, these wins look very much like the Patriots' dynasty wins, as opposed to the Bills crushing teams. Moving ahead. Woke is joke. All right, well, we'll see about that, but limping along to beat bad teams isn't just going to cut it. I don't buy that, and I don't buy that they're limping along. I think the Buffalo Bills size up these opponents. They're putting 30 on each one of them as they go through. And I think you've got a defense that is definitely developing. We've got to remember that the defensive line has a lot of new members on it. It's missing Ed Oliver the last couple of games. And Ryan Nielsen is running things in it. And it is a new way of playing. And that way of playing involves having attacking style defensive linemen, which flies in the face somewhat of gap integrity. And gap integrity is a lot of what is getting the Bills beat in the running game. But what I do like to see is the Bills summoning the energy and going, all right, wait a minute, no, this is not going to happen. And then the Bills go ahead and get it taken care of. So we'll take a drink from the Bills canister here. These are available on my website. Well, no, they will, though, once I get past 1,000 subs. You guys can help that if you're not in. I agree at woke. Okay, guys, we'll keep the political side of this down, actually, on the show. All right, Dean Drummer, I like your analysis this pack. Why aren't the Bills going deep more? And it's because they don't have to. And again, that's the case. Although we saw today, again, the beautiful shot to Jackson Hawes downfield somewhat. Of course, the throw to Dalton Kincaid. It's not a matter of the Bills wanting or not to go downfield. What it is about is what is available. And this is where Josh Allen has matured. But I think he even suffered a little bit from this lackadaisical, if you will, feel that the Bills have in the first parts of these games when they've come off of a break, which leads you to believe then that perhaps the Bills like to get warmed up. Excuse me, like a band, Fume Drummer, you'll know this, as I do, a band going out to play a club, and your first few numbers, you're trying to get into it, get warmed up a little bit, get a little sweat going, and then, of course, you go out and really start killing it. But I think that is what goes on with the Bills at times. What else do we got here? All right, we've got a lot of you watching here. I'm not seeing too many of your comments. Why do we play down to poor teams? This is woke again. Why do we play down to poor teams? We aren't coming out with confidence and up 21 in the first half. We were a 16-point favorite. First of all, I'm going to answer that question in two halves, and I'll talk to your second half, which really isn't a question. We were a 16-point favorite. Betting lines are not about what Las Vegas or the mob or whomever sets them, maybe even Rothstein from Casino, when at the end he's still putting lines on games. Betting lines are not about that. Betting lines are set such that equal amounts of money are bet on both teams. Because if that's the case, Las Vegas wins. And in this particular case, when you've got a team that like Buffalo that seems dominant, that ends up not winning by that amount, it's not that Buffalo failed because they didn't win by 16. It's because Las Vegas wants the bets to go against to be evened up, essentially, which is why you'll see the lines change from time to time. Again, the Bills were favored against the Ravens going into week 1, and then towards the end of the week, it went from Bills by 2 to Ravens by 1.5. That is just based on the line changing, based on where the money is going. And in terms of why do we play down to poor teams? Well, I don't think it's a matter of playing down to poor teams. It's just that, if you're going into a fight or whatever it may be, if you don't need to throw 20 of your best punches to win, you don't throw them. You throw the punches you need to get by and win, to get out of the game with the W, and to have that win and go fight another week. As far as the playing down to poor teams, listen, these guys are all talented in the NFL. They all get paid. They're all professional clubs. There aren't really, when you say a poor team, the difference isn't that huge. And in fact, you have to understand that sometimes these teams, when they come in, especially an 0-3 team, they want very badly to get a win. And if it's tough for Buffalo to get up the wind after a bit of a break and it takes them a half, well, that's the way it is. But I'm happy with the W, and I'm happy just to see them progress and keep on growing. Again, that's why I'm not looking to see that. Another comment from Fume Number. 2 drives in a row. The Saints started in Bills territory, and both times they had to punt. That takes the anxiety out of these games. The only anxious guy is Tyler Bass. And, yeah, that I don't know if that turns into season ending or whatever, but once again, Prater was on today. His kickoffs were all down to the 2. He had 1 at the 5, I think. And then, of course, the touchback at the end. He was instructed to kick it into the end zone before you start thinking, oh, he messed up that kickoff. The last thing you want is when you're up by 12 is to allow a team a run back under these new kickoff rules, enabling them to return it for a score and then try the announced onside kick. That's why you kick it out of the end zone and let them take the ball at the 35. Now you've got your defense out there to play. So as far as the Bills go, I think this is the situation we're going to look at for a while. You've got the Patriots coming up, who I believe put one on the Panthers today. I saw them at one point. They were up a good bit. The Panthers were up 6-0, I know, when the Patriots once again got a punt return, I think, in this case, or maybe it was a kick return for a score. They've done that, I believe, 3 weeks in a row. The Bills will have to watch that closely, even to the point of going ahead and kicking it and giving it to them on the 35, if that's what it takes. But again, you're going to have the Patriots will be an underdog, a road underdog on a primetime game, a road underdog on a primetime Sunday night game next week. So you can count on the Patriots coming out with some fire. Now, I personally don't think much of Drake May. I kind of have him in the same category as J.J. McCarthy, who, of course, had one good quarter, but he's been hurt and not playing now. They may have missed him today in Ireland because Carson Wentz just cannot get rid of the ball. I mean, the processing just isn't there. Mocha's joke in with, I'm happy with the W as well. It just seems that when we play losing teams, our foot isn't on the gas. Well, sometimes you don't want to have your foot on the gas. You don't need to run the engine at 3,000 RPM if you can do just fine at 1,950 RPM. And I believe this is how the Bills are handling this, because the Bills did not play their ones hardly at all in the preseason. And I, for one, tended to agree with that, because even if you do play them, it is not the same as a regular season game. The bullets aren't real. It's not the same. And to send guys out there to try to get a feel for it when it's not the same, it gives the wrong feel. Now, the Bills, of course, did face a good opponent to open the season, the Ravens, and came out sluggish after, a long bye that lasted from the AFC title game January 26th of this year through the preseason, where the ones really didn't see any time, especially Josh Allen and a few others, to the point where they got their act together, second half a bit, and then at the end of the fourth quarter to win that game. And that still stands strong to me, that the Bills were able to do that coming back. And then you've got this string of what are seemingly more winnable games, which, yes, the Bills should win. And you can call them poor teams if you want, those opponents. But the fact is the Bills are able to do what needs to be done to win these games. And I'll keep on going back to say that these wins that the Bills are getting look very Patriot-esque from the Patriots dynasty when they were winning a bunch of Super Bowls. Because the Patriots, you didn't see them crushing teams. Once in a while, certainly, as you do with the Bills once in a while. And the Bills, essentially did that to the Jets. The Bills will probably do that a couple of times this season for sure. But the Bills are doing what is necessary to get the win. These games are not the AFC title game. They are not the Super Bowl. You are just trying to get to those. And at 4-0, they are in the best shape of any team in the AFC to do just that. All right. I guess those are a couple of beers. I don't know what those are. Those are fist pumps. Woke's joke, the fume drummer. You guys are agreeing on your positions. I understand that. Games in Europe, what's the point? The Vikings have to do 2 in a row. That's just stupid. Well, they chose that and are actually choosing to have those both away games. So, in that sense, it might be a slight advantage. Well, more of an advantage without Carson Wentz, but a slight advantage from the standpoint that you've got away games where the home team is actually having to travel and give it conditions as if it is an away game. But that's only the point on that particular item with the home versus away. The idea of them placing a franchise overseas is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And I don't see how it would work because that team would have a very hard time winning, and that might become an uncompetitive situation because they are going to have the longest road trips of any team. We see the charts to start the season. Who's got the most travel? Of course, the Bills have the least travel this season because their longest, well, it's not even their longest road trip, but the only time they even leave the time zone is to go to Houston. I believe those trips might be a touch shorter than those to go down to both Tampa, where they will play, and then, of course, Miami and their game down there with them. And Atlanta, and those would be their longest road trips. But again, this business of having the NFL having overseas teams, to me, that's nothing but a money grab. It's disgusting. And what are you going to do when you add another team, a 33rd team? I mean, you completely screw up the scheduling. You completely screw up the divisions. Right now, it is even with 4 teams in each division. And I just hope that they don't allow greed to overtake the situation to where you've got one of those teams because they're making money. Because making too much money and being greedy about it is the fastest way to get your ass kicked when you get to heaven. Believe me. Count on that. No, Fume Drummer, the Vikings will not be returning. They will stay over there, which in fact gives them even more of an advantage to whomever is coming to see them next. And then they have their bye afterwards. So if a team could take advantage of having to travel, the Vikings were given probably that choice. They're not just going to force that on a team, but they gave them certain advantages. So no, they won't be coming home. Woke is back with a dub is a dub, whether by 1 or 30 points is just a poor mentality. Jimmy Johnson and the 1987 opponents, he had no mercy. That's a winning mentality. I don't agree. I really don't. That's fine. That was a different NFL at that point also. And when we're talking about today's NFL, and there is parity in the league, and I think the fact is that it's winning in the NFL is hard, and I'm just looking at the Bills to try to continue this, to keep on stacking wins and getting to the point where they get to this game versus Kansas City at home on a 425 in Week 9, where they're undefeated, and hopefully Kansas City is down. Because it would be nice for the Bills then to be in a position to put them down and make it almost impossible for them not only to win the number 1 seed, but hopefully even make the playoffs. 73,000 fans in Dublin today. God knows how much the tickets cost. Well, it's hard to say. I don't know how many of those fans travel and how many are in town. I will say that, because I did watch that game today, and I will say that game seemed more like a real NFL game with the crowd than some of the others I've seen where it's been more split. Obviously today there were more Steelers fans, and of course the Irish connection with Art Rooney. They've been planning this for a long time. They're probably pushing this quite a bit. They got a lot of fans in there. You saw the Guinness flowing in the stands. That was interesting. But actually, Dublin, of course, if you talk about a trip from New York, well, you can get there almost as fast. Not quite if you have to go out to the West Coast, but still, I believe having overseas teams is untenable for the league. And I'm not sure, unless it's just all about money, and if it's all about money, that's unfortunate. But that was definitely had the look of a Steelers home game, as you say. Fume Drummer, I understand what you're saying. There will be no mention of what you're saying on your comment on that subject ever on this show. That was one of the most disgusting periods of the Bills, and it had to be the nadir, which means the low point for Ralph Wilson's ownership of this team. That was very unfortunate. Fair enough, I agree. On any given Sunday, I'm just a bit uncertain about the Bills' hype. We could easily be 2-2 right now. Well, certainly, but they're not. And if you're talking about the Bills' hype, whose hype? They're hyping the Bills. I think the Bills actually do remain somewhat humble and hungry. And I think you saw that with Sean McDermott readily admitting in the halftime interview going into the locker room, where he said, well, we're getting outplayed right now. And he wasn't fiery or angry. You could tell he was pissed underneath it. And I'm sure he let loose in the locker room. We'll never see what those are. I think there's a Sean McDermott side that we don't see. And one of those situations would have been in that locker room. We said, we're being outplayed. We're ignoring fundamentals. Situational football. We're being ignorant of how to play situational football. And every bit of it was right. And going back to the Jimmy Johnson comment, yeah, you can get that team pumped up to go out and kill every week. And if that team is good enough, they will do it. And that Dallas Cowboys team was quite something. I mean, it was good enough that they coasted to another Super Bowl win with the Barry Switzer coaching them after Jimmy Johnson left. And so that was a great team. But as far as getting a team up on the razor's edge for each and every week, that's difficult to do. And a lot of times you can compare this to, like Fume Drummer would know playing in bands, that it's tough to be on that razor's edge every minute. We are humans. We go up and down. And I think the Bills keep this team at a level, a little bit humble, a little hungry, knowing it's hard to win in the NFL, going out and getting it done and having another W, and then moving on to the next one. And in the meantime, this team is growing. The defense is growing. Definitely want to see more about the line play and what's going on with some of these runs, if it's gap integrity or what it may be, or how the linebackers are fitting in. Excuse me once again. The cough's getting better, by the way, if you've noticed. I quit smoking about 5 weeks ago, and I don't mean Marlboros. And much improved, and it's coming right along. But that aside, I have to say that the Bills, they just don't want to be on that edge every single week. And you can tell with the way Sean McDermott coaches this team, that they are taking it on a game-by-game basis. But it's hard. It's hard sometimes for NFL players. There's a lot of noise that players are exposed to that they weren't exposed to years ago, with social media, with reporting, with podcasts. I mean, it's proliferated so much that it's hard to avoid some of it. And yes, you had to think that there were some attitudes in that Bills locker room through the week, approaching this game as though this is another easy one. We should win it. And they did win it. But of course you got to think that some of the players are feeling that same sort of thing as we do. And of course it's not always going to happen. It's not always going to happen. And it can get close. And again, we saw it happen to the Chargers today, after we've been hearing about how Jim Harbaugh is like the god of coaches, and everywhere he goes, it's great. And they went to the Giants today, and it wasn't so. And not only are they perhaps wrong about Jim Harbaugh, but I've said this all along, and I don't think Justin Herbert is this great that we talk about. I just don't think so. I think he looks very good when he's got a couple of softballs tossed at him that he can hit out of the park. But I just don't see it with Justin Herbert. And any comparisons that are made of him to Josh Allen are complete and utter poppycock. I'm trying to leave the language good here. Bills-Lions Super Bowl? Well, you might just see that, because after the fact that Green Bay loses to Cleveland last week, and then Detroit goes and handles Cleveland this week, albeit at home. Of course, the Browns were home last week when they beat the Packers. Again, I feel the same thing about Jordan Love. I just don't think I put him in kind of the same category as Justin Herbert. I just don't see it. But certainly, Lions-Bills in the Super Bowl actually, at this point, looks more likely even than it might have as we went through the season last year. And to that comment, if we ever see Bills versus Lions, Dan Campbell will eat McDermott for lunch. Sorry to sound negative, but Sean comes off way too soft. Now, that's your opinion, and there are a lot of McDermott haters for certain. But I believe that Sean McDermott actually is an excellent head coach. I think you cannot deny, with the Bills being 4-0, Dan Campbell is not, decidedly. And again, that was a division game, and I think I don't know if they were favored. They were probably a road dog going up to Green Bay in that opener. They lose 27-13, of course. And I think, the thought was that Detroit would fall off a little bit, and that was with the loss of the coordinators, not just the two main ones. They lost a lot of coaches. And then they end up losing that game, but come back and win the next one, and then, of course, put one on the Ravens. I don't know if that says more about the Lions or the Ravens, for that matter. And again, the Ravens are another Harbaugh coach team, and you've already gotten my opinion on the Harbaugh coaching tree, which has made it to autumn a little soon because the leaves seem to be falling off. But at any rate, you never know. Dan Campbell might win that Super Bowl by going for fourth downs. However, I think the Bills are a far more battle-tested squad than are these Lions. And we'll see how it ends out working out through the through the season, but as the Swami once said, and of course Chris Berman, that's why they play the games. But at any rate, guys, good to see that the Bills won. Of course, up next, again, they'll be visited by the Patriots. And it's good to see the Bills winning these home games and stacking these wins at home early on as they need to. But that, of course, will just make it go the distance here, because they will have a target on them as they go through. Don't sleep on the Patriots. You know, that could well be the case. We'll see. I do believe, though, that Buffalo will have Oliver and Milano back. I think they were held back, and of course Spencer Brown held back today. I think all three of them play if this is a playoff game or a division clinching game. But it wasn't, and I think that's why they have left them on the sideline for a couple of games here. And also it gives these very valuable minutes to other guys who are getting starts and more minutes on the game. And I am going to jump in and look at film this week. I have not had the NFL Plus. I am getting it finally to be able to look at the game film, and we'll even have some situations where I throw some film up here rather than me in my silly hat, which the only reason I haven't been wearing it lately is because it is still hot up in the studio. In fact, if you can hear the rush of air, it's to keep it cooler, which I started doing just about 20 minutes before we got into this. Ralph Wilson was a Detroit guy. The Bills' first uniforms were the same blue and gray. There was a common heritage, and that is very, very true. In fact, Ralph Wilson had wanted to have part ownership of the Lions, and that did not work out. And then he decided that he would join what was called the Foolish Club, which were 7 other owners that wanted to start a rival league, the American Football League, which it kind of got its name from the old All-American Football League, in which there was a Buffalo team in that. That was back in the early 40s. I think it kind of came apart really with the start of World War II. And then it's also true that in the course of Ralph Wilson trying to determine where he wanted to place his franchise, that he was looking around and where he might do so. And in fact, he was very close to putting the franchise in Miami, Florida. And one of the reasons he did not was because the Orange Bowl, as it were, as it was called, I think even then, before we got into corporate sponsorships where the stadium name can change every couple of years, but they would not renovate that. And certainly you could say, well, then why would he have gone to Buffalo? Because the Rock Pile, War Memorial Stadium, was definitely in need of some kind of renovation, which actually was done to increase its seating capacity to about 41,000, I think it might have been. I actually saw a game at the Rock Pile with a beautiful green grass field. But of course, the stadium was essentially shit. But it was a Buffalo, I think a Buffalo sports journalist that got with Ralph Wilson and really convinced him that Buffalo would be the place to be because the fan base would just be so vehemently great. And that was as true then as it is now. And that's how the Bills got their franchise and how it narrowly avoided being a Miami franchise. And of course, the Miami franchise was not one of the original 8. Miami did not start playing football in the AFL until 1966. Love your coverage and commentary. Keep up the great work. I will very much so, sir. I'm not going to pound you with stats and replay and retalk plays and so forth to a great extent because you've already seen the game. I give you what my overriding opinions. It's a little more narrative-based, and I have a little bit of a larger overview than narrowing in on these games because, again, I cannot stress enough that my feeling is that the Bills are we hear Sean McDermott talk about complementary football a lot. We hear Sean McDermott and the Bills talk about game script a lot and how game script can inform what you're doing as you go through the contest. But I think what the Bills are employing here, and I know I'm right, is season script. There is a season script that you have to look at, and you have to understand and feel how that season is going to go. And there are many podcasters, I know, that were disappointed that the Bills didn't have a so-called cupcake in the first game to go ahead and get that 1-0 and get that good feeling going. I, for one, was very glad they had to play the Ravens. And you go back and watch my earlier shows, and you'll hear me say that. Even when I talked about the schedule in one of the first couple of shows I did on this podcast, I was glad that it was going to be a challenging game to start to get them slapped into motion early on to start. But then I've heard talk that, the NFL handed the Bills this easy schedule. That's horse shit. The schedule is created by formula. You play each of your division opponents twice. That gives you 6 of your 17 games. And then you play a first-place schedule that goes round-robin around the teams you're going to play, where the first place first, second place second. And then, of course, you revolve every year in playing an entire division from the other conference. And in this case, it's the NFC South. And, of course, the Bills, in facing the NFC South, they've played the Saints now, and they will play the Buccaneers yet. They'll play the Falcons on the Monday night coming up, and they'll play the Panthers down there. And people might say, well, how do they get that easy schedule? Well, the Chiefs had that schedule last year, if you recall. The Chiefs and the rest of the AFC West played the NFC South. And if you further recall, the Chiefs almost were beaten in a couple of those games, especially versus the Buccaneers and versus the Falcons, which was very close. So it's not the Bills' fault of who they play. And yes, although the Bills started off the season with, I think it was the 5th easiest strength of schedule. Of course, that's based on coming into the season, that's taking your opponents for this season and what is their cumulative win-loss percentage from the previous season. That placed the Bills at the number 5 easiest schedule, I believe, coming in. But now the Bills, I believe, might have the easiest strength of schedule going forward. And you hear about, the Bills, why do they get the easiest thing? Well, first of all, if you're talking about the strength of schedule, you're talking about, if you're looking at it in overall league terms, now in this season, you recalculate it based on the win-loss percentage of the opponents that you have this season. Well, certainly the Bills have won 4 games, so that means that 4 other teams have had losses inflicted upon them that lowers that win-loss percentage of the opponents. And in terms of it getting lowered for future games, for example, in the division overall, yes, the Bills have to play the Patriots and the Jets and the Dolphins. Patriots twice, Jets and Dolphins each once. Well, the winning percentage of those teams is partly influenced by the fact that Buffalo beat 2 of those teams already. So Buffalo is not only the beneficiary of this easier schedule, they're responsible for causing it also. because they've inflicted losses on opponents that are still coming to them on their schedule. Let's see. We got some new guys in here and a couple of other good comments. Nice to see everybody in. Again, if you haven't commented yet, just tell me where you're coming from. Tell me where Bills Mafia extends to. Got to get this one. Art Wander was the best. Yes, thank you very much. Art Wander was awesome, and that was a big name early on in the history of these Bills. Tiny Tot the Kilowatt. Don't get me started. There we go. We don't seem to have a receiver that goes short over the middle like Andre Reed used to, as well as Cole Beasley. Well, I think part of that is the way defenses are playing the Bills. And the other part of it is that both of those receivers that you mentioned, and I think this is the larger part of it, for Jim Kelly in the case of Andre Reed and Cole Beasley in the case of Josh Allen in the earlier parts of his career, those were receivers that if the quarterback gets in trouble, he knows where to look to get a layup. And layups are important in this sport. You need to get them. You need to have the ability to get a first down when you need. But I think when you're in the everyone eats 2.0 mentality, it's not so much about having to search for layups because I think layups exist around the field. I mean, for example, we saw Josh Palmer with a great catch or two today, very timely, getting open. And again, go back and watch my videos. I predicted this earlier. I predicted this in the preseason, even before the preseason. Jackson Hawes is Travis Kelce-Swift 2.0, except he's got a lot more class than Kelce. And when he's getting beat, he doesn't have a dumb look on his face like Kelce. Of course, we don't know because we haven't seen Jackson Hawes getting beat yet. Nasty tight end, nasty blocker. Good hands, which he demonstrated in the preseason, and making very, very timely catches. And you've seen Dawson Knox all but disappear from this offense. I mean, Dawson Knox ham-handed one, I think, a game or two ago. It might have been versus the Dolphins, right here on his hands. Ball deflects off. But the thing with Jackson Hawes is the fact that you see him an awful lot in motion, and when you've got Cook sitting in the backfield, you know very well that it's probably going to be a run where Hawes is. And I think I saw that in every occasion today, except where the one play where Hawes was in motion off to the left, goes to block off tackle. I think Cook was going to follow that, but then he ends up squirting off to the right side and getting some yardage over there. But the thing Hawes offers you is that when he comes out, being the serious, furious blocker he is, and being that you have the threat of Cook running behind him with these nasty blocks he's able to pull off. But the fact is, he's not Alec Anderson. He is a receiver also. So if you have the opportunity for him to chip and get free, and that's what you're seeing happening. And Josh Allen is gaining more and more trust in that as we go along. We'll get a few more in here. Cole Beasley got screwed because he didn't take the jab. Well, not taking the jab is one thing, but being very vocal about it in a situation where you want some team unity is another. There's personal choice and what you want to do with yourself, and then there's, making noise about having to do it or not having to do it and what everybody else should do. That's another thing, and of course, it's a subject we do not engage in on this particular podcast. Rousseau stepped up today, that is definitely for sure. And This is a good question. Who do we want to win today, KC or Baltimore? Well, since Buffalo already has the game advantage over Kansas City, or rather Baltimore, and because of the fact that Buffalo seems to have Baltimore's number in the playoffs, whereas we certainly don't seem to have Kansas City's number in the playoffs, I'd actually, of course, rather see Baltimore win and keep Kansas City down. I'd sooner see Kansas City out of the playoffs altogether. And we'll see how that actually goes down. But a great win today, though, and we'll have to see how the rest of it turns out. I know some of you guys are into and watching that game. I want to get to it also. I've got it paused. I plan on taking a look at it very, very shortly as soon as we get done here. But again, we won't keep you too much longer because I know there's a lot of football left to watch. I am very interested to see the reaction in Chargers land about going and getting beat by Jackson Dart and the New York Giants, the New York Football Giants. I've got a little bit of affinity for the Giants, even though much of it was lost when they beat the Bills in their first try at the Super Bowl. But my younger brother, Mark, who may be watching this, actually was an offensive guard with the Giants in 1985. He actually almost made that team, made it to the last cut. And, in fact, he played for Parcells. He played along with, certainly Lawrence Taylor and a few other of the greats. He was good friends with Mark Bavaro, so I had an affinity for the Giants. And, again, much of that evaporated, but he still knows Parcells to this day. And if you ever want to check him out, Mark Salter, he's got a book. He's an author. He's written a couple of books, but he's got one called Sins of the Tribe, which came out a couple of years ago. Very cool book about college football, a particular story wrapped inside an overall feeling of what college football is about. Not to be missed, a great read. You can't put it down. Prater from here on out. What do you guys think? There is just a feeling of confidence and consistency with Matt Prater that I just have never really had with Tyler Bass. And of course, you can say what you want. Sean McDermott could say what he wants. Yeah, when Tyler's back, he's our guy. The operative portion of that sentence being when Tyler's back. Because this injury he has, and I heard a great point made earlier this week about Bass, was the fact that this injury, although I thought it might have been the fact that in camp he was, when the day he suffered this injury, as it was reported, that it was a bit of a rainy day and the Bills were outside. And who knows if there was a slip. But I heard a point made earlier this week that I thought was very interesting, which was the fact that with the new kickoff rules, which I heard mentioned earlier, I didn't put it up in the comments, but there was a little bit of dislike for the new kickoff rules. I think they're great. At least they've made it into a play. And of course, at the end, Prater kicks it into the end zone, which is exactly what was wanted. So you didn't have the Saints with an ability to have any kind of a run back, because there's always a chance on those run backs. But I'm wondering, back to Bass, if there was any sort of an attempt to learn how to perform either this kicking motion that's not full on, but it has to be very controlled to get it into that landing zone, or the dirty kicks, as they're called, where you've got a lower kick that goes in and hits in the landing zone, but then is bouncing and moving very quickly towards the receiver. And we saw cases last week, a lot of that not being able to be handled. Now, quite unfortunately for the game analyst, Charles Davis, today, on the Bills telecast, he came out and talked about dirty balls, and then, of course, he changed it immediately to dirty kicks. I don't think the dirty balls part will make it to the Madden soundtrack in Madden 26 or 27, and I'm sure he actually was a little bit sorry he mentioned that he turned it right into dirty kicks. So that he kind of stepped on one there. Thanks for the interactive show. This is awesome. Next show, Arthur Moats. And yes, we'll be here. I want you guys to have your questions ready for him. And in that show, I don't know. What I'm going to ask is we do, because we can actually do this in the streaming software, is if you've got a question for that show, just start it off with a Q and a colon or something like that so we can sort them, because I would like to have Arthur answer questions. And again, my approach with him, I mean, I want to talk about the of course, the hit on Brett Favre and his history with the teams. But I'm really interested in getting into with Arthur Moats is from a player's standpoint, how some of the things, especially what the Bills and even the Steelers, because he'll be interested in being able to speak on that, are going through this season, how that affects a team from the inside perspective, as opposed to a fan perspective that we, of course, can talk about here, you and I both indicating what we feel about this or that, what happened. And for example, what does that kind of win for the Bills versus the Patriots, especially coming back the way they did at the very end? What does that do for the team? And on one end of the spectrum, it could be, well, it's just football, and it's a win or a loss, and we happen to win and we move on. Or does it instill something in the team that they're able to live on as a confidence boost going forward? And if the Bills go to the extent I've predicted they will go this season, and again, I've predicted that they would go undefeated, I'm going to stick to saying that. Of course, it's very difficult to do, and I also predicted they will win the Super Bowl. And if they do win the Vince, and they hold that up, it'll be very interesting to know from an inside perspective what wins like that can do for the team, and what really is the mentality of the team going forward. And especially this being the last year at the Ralph, is there something special about making sure they win every game? And it's hard to say that, because I think most of the times you'll hear the team reply, listen, we're focused on this game alone. You even heard Josh Allen say that. But we'll see what happens as we get into the rest of the season. And I know everybody wants to go and watch the rest of the, or get into and even start the big game out in Kansas City. So we're going to go ahead and cut it off here. I want to thank you ever so much for being here. Again, like and subscribe to this video if you've enjoyed it and want more of this content. I'm giving you a post game every week. I have it set up to go just as quickly as I can after the end of the game. And then we are doing a regular Wednesday night 8 p.m. show. I know it was 9 last week. We're going to stick to the 8 p.m. That's when I'll be starting with Arthur Moats this Wednesday night, October 1st. Don't miss it and be here. But until then, I want to definitely thank you so much for being here. I want you to be good, do good. God bless, and go Bills. This is the Ralph Rant, and I am the Ralph. Be good. Bye.